Keeping your business healthy in today's marketplace can be a challenging and overwhelming task. From the threat of litigation inside and outside your organization and the inefficiencies that can rob your bottom line as a result of unproven marketing programs, the deck can be stacked against you. To get ahead of these challenges and stay ahead of your competition, the Bottled Business Sense Show provides practical business solutions that uniquely emphasize key legal principles, management techniques, and marketing strategies to protect and ensure the longevity of your business. You'll learn how to implement marketing and protection principles equal to those used by today's most successful corporations. Join your hosts Bill Bernard, Rick Moscoso, and Steve Smith for some high-energy discussion that will inspire you to take control of your business so it can prosper in today's consistently challenging business environment.
Good morning, everyone. Today is Tuesday at 10 a.m. We're here again for another episode of the Bottled Business Sense Show. My name is Rick Moscoso here, one of your three co-hosts this morning, and really excited for today's episode as we begin, or we're into the early part of the new year. But before we get on to the topic, I want to bring on my two other co-hosts, Mr. Steve Smith of Growth Source Coaching and Bill Bernard of WFB Legal Consulting, Inc. How are you guys doing today?
Doing pretty good for the beginning of January. So I don't think I said it to you guys previously, but I hope you had a happy new year.
Yeah, same to you, Steve, and welcome everybody to the show, the Bottle Business Sense Show, known internationally, I hope, as the show that allows everyone to protect their business and have it prosper on a daily basis. That's what we try to do, and we provide free information. And by the way, before we get started into the show, which I'm really excited about and want to say a few words about, tell everybody where they can get a hold, if you would, where they can get a hold of us, Rick, on social media, the Bottle Business Sense Show.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you can reach out to us anytime on social media, Facebook, Google+, at Bottle Business Sense Show, or on Twitter at BB Sense Show. And if you'd like to be a guest participant here on the show with an interesting topic, please drop us a line at bottledbusinessshow@gmail.com, and we'll be happy to take a look at see what you can offer our small business owners.
And for audio only, we're on blogtalkradio.com/Bottled Business Sense Show. You know, this show is so exciting to me, and it really transcends its name, which is essentially why you should delegate in your business and why it's so important and how to effectively delegate. I mean, it's so very important to me personally. But you know, what I thought was fascinating, Steve, and what I want to address right off the top before we get into the real substance of this is we were talking before the show, and we were discussing the fact that a London business school did a study apparently, and only 30% of managers they found feel that they can delegate well. I mean, what do you take from that, Steve?
What I take from it is delegation as a skill is not really taught in most business schools. It's not something you learn in college. It's something that you have to adapt to depending on the environment that you're in. And unless you're in a position where you're able to basically hand over responsibility, give projects off to people, and then kind of monitor and meet with them and kind of encourage them and make sure they get it right. You know, unless you're into that, or unless somebody shows you how to do that, most people shy away from it because doing it badly looks bad. So sometimes people try to get away with not doing it at all because, you know, let's face it, if you're the big cheese in the company, you can tell people to do what you want, and until they just get tired of it and leave, everybody's going to put up with that. So, I run into that all the time. You know, delegation is probably one of the most powerful tools that you can have in your management arsenal in terms of getting the most out of your resources, like your people. But if you don't do it, you're really blowing a lot of opportunity to make sure that the best people do the best things or the right things, and your time is freed up to do the things that are most important to you.
Well, how is it that you then begin the process? How is it, in other words, that you choose the particular tasks that you are going to delegate versus the ones that you're not?
Well, the first thing you have to understand is what is delegation, okay? The reason people don't delegate a lot of times is because they feel like if they give something over, something they feel is important, something that needs to be done, if they give it over to somebody else, it's not going to get done right, or it's not going to get done as well as they would do it, or the process of showing them what needs to be done and going through all of that initial orientation, they might as well do it themselves. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that happens. And so for that reason, people shy away from getting into the act of delegation. Delegation doesn't mean give somebody an important task to do or monitor some project and then walk away and never ask another question about it. It's basically sitting down with somebody and saying, look, I want you to handle this project for me. Here's what it's involved. Here's what you have available to you to get it done. Let's set up some checkpoints along the way so you can keep me updated as to how you're doing. I need this thing to be complete by the end of April. So you've got 90 days to work on it. That's what delegation is. It's tethering out the responsibility and the authority to the people who you trust to do work that you don't have to do yourself, because your time's probably better spent doing other things.
So in other words, you're saying don't have the attitude that it's my way or the highway. Let the person that you trust do it his or her own way, as long as they get it done the way you want it done?
Yeah, essentially what you have to be focused on is the end result. What is it you want out of the project or out of this person managing this area of your business? After that, unless there's something about managing this process that you're ceding over to somebody else that has to be done a particular way because of the kind of business you have, then you need to give them the latitude to do it the way they would see best, because you never know. Sometimes people find better ways to do it than you've been doing it. So don't get all hung up in how they do it. Just maintain some checkpoints in terms of what they tell you they're doing, so you know how they're doing along the way, and just be focused on the end result. That's really what it's all about.
Well, what if you guys brought? Let me just say something. You guys brought up a very key word here as this discussion started, and it's delegating with somebody who you trust. So, what if you're in a situation? You're a small, relatively small company, and there's only one resource, one guy, or one person that can do the job that you need to delegate, and you're willing to do that. But how do you keep that on track if he's not necessarily in that same trust bubble as some of the other employees?
Well, if you have a situation like that, probably the best thing to start doing is sit down with the individual and explain to them the importance of the project that you're handing over to them. Let them know the significance of it, what it means to the company, what it means to, whatever it's based on. Get their buy-in, get them to tell you that they understand that this is an important project that they're being put in charge of. Now, if you feel like they're deficient in some areas, like they procrastinate, they're not organized, they don't schedule things well, so you're kind of worried about whether this project is going to move at the speed it needs to, that's where you set up prearranged checkpoints. You get them started off, you let them go a couple of days, and then you say, okay, Wednesday morning, we're going to sit down for 30 minutes. I want you to tell me how it's going so far. What have you been able to identify or set into motion as your plan? And so you just kind of manage the process checkpoint to checkpoint. And at some point, if it's completely going off the rails, then you may have to sit down and figure out, okay, why is this happening? Because ultimately, taking it back from the employee that's counterproductive. What you really want to figure out is, why can't the employee handle something that you thought from your angle they should be totally technically qualified to do? So there's a bit of mentoring and management that goes along with it, but at the end of the day, if you're not certain that they really get it, you just tighten up the rope.
Well, let me relay an experience I had when I was with my law firm, delegating duties to young lawyers. Partners would delegate duties to young lawyers, both for training purposes and to get things done that needed to be done that we couldn't do all ourselves. What I found is that it would be more important to delegate duties to people who were busier than other people if the busier people could accomplish the delegation better. In other words, because they were busier, that wasn't a reason to give the delegated duty to somebody else, because probably that person is busier because that person he or she can get it done quicker, whatever they're doing, and move on to the next task. So I would think that would be important, wouldn't it, Steve, to not necessarily delegate duties to somebody who's the least busiest, but rather the best person.
Right. Yes. And what that all really comes down to is, as the manager of the department, as the owner of the business, you've got to have a really good idea of your people's skill set, of their capabilities, of how they approach things mentally, what they look at, what's important to them, what they're good at, and so that you can match up the project, the task, the area of the business that you want to cede over to somebody else. You're matching up to the right person. Because at the end of the day, they could be totally technically qualified, but if they're overwhelmed with what they're doing now, putting something else on their plate isn't going to, it's not going to work well.
Well, how do you strike a balance, Steve? Let's say you've delegated a duty to somebody, you trust them, they're the best person for the job. How do you know when to have a conversation with them? Let's say you give them a deadline. I need this done in 60 days. How do you at times risk insulting them by continually monitoring their progress, or do you just let them go and say, I'll check back with you once after 30 days? Or, how do you make that determination to ride that line between, being having too much critique, but being able to let them get on their horse and ride along and do it their own way?
Well, if you're giving a project to someone and you're estimating it's going to take 30 days to complete, or you want it done inside of 60 days, okay, you should be checking in with them a whole lot more frequently than once. And typically what I tell people is, you look at the individual you're giving it over to. Is this something they've done before? Is this something that they do well? If so, let them run with it, okay? Because you trust that they know what they're doing. They're going to be able to take it and do everything you've expected, you've seen in the past, no problem. Mm-hmm. If it's a fairly new assignment and the person's capable, but it's a little bit out of what they've been used to doing, that's when I would suggest for the first 30 days, set up weekly checkpoints. Every Friday morning, we're going to sit down between 9 and 9:30, and I want you to update me on how you're doing. That way, they're in control of the meeting. You get to ask questions about, how it's going and where they are versus where you think they should have been. But you put the authority for them to set the meeting and take you through what they've accomplished to that point. And then you talk about what the next phase is and stuff like that. So you're just you're checking in with them on a regular basis until you see that they've got it. Everything's put in motion. It's just a matter of completing the assignment. And then you can you give them a little more room to run. Yeah. But it's better to do that than to micromanage people to the point where they feel like, why did you give me this? Because you're in it every single day. You might as well just do it yourself. And then they're right. You're putting all your time into watching what they're doing. You might as well do it.
And how would you, I assume by what you're saying, Steve, that it would be important then, in fact, to establish a deadline. In other words, you don't just delegate a task and say, get it done. You have a deadline, and that deadline is for a specific purpose. Why don't you tell everybody what the purpose of having a deadline is?
When you give somebody an assignment or a project, and you don't give them any kind of deadline as to what it is you want them to complete, the whole assignment will tend to get thrown into everything else they're doing, because let's face it, we either set deadlines for things we're doing, or we have deadlines imposed upon us by customers, by other outside vendors. There's a whole host of reasons why you might have a laundry list of things you have to get done now because they need to be done today or by this week. So if you don't take your project and assign some deadlines to it, that project is going to lose out to everything else that's more urgent to them in the moment. So you have to make sure that they understand that, every Friday for the next 30 days, we're going to sit at 9 o'clock and we're going to talk about how you're doing. And then after that, we'll determine how many checkpoints we need. But, come hell or high water, this thing needs to be completed and ready to go by February 28th, because March 1, we're launching it.
So it's an accountability issue, right, Rick? Right, Steve? It sounds like an accountability issue.
Well, it is accountability, and we all need it. I mean, nobody is devoid of just being able to, just mechanically crank things out. And everybody needs to understand what the time frame is so they can budget their own time and their own schedule to not only accommodate that, but everything else that's on their plate.
Mm-hmm. So when you're delegating a task or a project to an employee, it's obviously it's very important to let them know exactly what you need them to do, how they're going to do it, give them the proper authority, and to be able to follow up and check on their work frequently to make sure that they're on track. Do you find that employers will also be more effective if they establish some kind of a reward system for outstanding service, or being clear on what the obviously you're going to be clear on what the consequences are going to be if there's a deadline involved, but do you find that helps if there's a reward system in place?
Well, I don't know that it needs to necessarily be in the form of a reward, but something else you mentioned definitely needs to happen, and that's recognition. All right. So here's a good example. Back at the second company that I was working with, it was a Lysol manufacturing company, and I was up in the headquarters in northern New Jersey, and I was in the sales department, working with marketing and a lot of other people, outside sales. It was kind of a senior management training ground, so to speak. Well, one of the things, the VP came to me one day and he says, our sales operating procedures manual hasn't been updated in like 8 years. And of course, by then, names and numbers in the book were all wrong, and there was procedures and things that they didn't do anymore. So they basically gave me 3 months to write a new manual. And so I went through the whole process of, setting up times to interview with different departments, get their processes, build this thing out into a 300-page operating manual for a 250-person sales force. So what they did when we finished it, at the next national sales meeting, I got to stand up and tell these folks that they now have a Bible that they can go to figure out how to do things. And, they allowed me to introduce that to the sales force as opposed to the VP standing up there and doing it. They just chose to do that. So whether you do it that way or you give personal recognition to someone who's taken on a big assignment, and maybe it was one that took a lot of their time and they didn't have the time to give, but they did it anyway. When you recognize them in front of their peers, in front of the rest of the company, I mean, that's what I call psychic income. It doesn't show up in your paycheck, but there's a lot of value in that to the employee in terms of their own self-worth and their contribution to the company.
And as a crossover, by the way, I might mention that as you do this, you stick these little notes in your drop file in your desk drawer, and they make a good foundation for helping to provide an annual performance review.
Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep. Now, one of the things that caught my eye when I was looking at this London article, Steve, is there was something in there about delegating responsibility and authority, not just the task itself. So again, when you're having these communications with people and you're talking with them and checking in on them, what does that mean essentially? Are you delegating responsibility and authority to the individual so that they may, in fact, then delegate part of it to somebody else down the line, or what exactly does that mean?
Now, if you delegate a task to somebody, basically what you're saying is, I need you to compile this report, and I need it by Friday, and so somebody goes off and does the report, and they bring it to you by Friday, okay? They've really had no decision-making in terms of how it got done, and they're really not responsible for the outcome. They just did the task, okay? So you're just using them as another set of arms that you don't have time to do. Maybe it's something you don't like to do, and that's fine. Those things always pop up. But the difference between that and giving somebody the responsibility and the authority is when you give them the responsibility, you're saying, okay, I'm entrusting you with this area of the business. And maybe it's a new marketing campaign, and you want them to go off and create this thing, and in 90 days you're going to launch a brand new approach to marketing your business. And that's their responsibility. If that thing goes down the tubes, they own that. So they own that. But at the same time, you're basically saying you've also got the authority to leverage whatever resources in the company you need to make this thing work. So you give them some power to be able to get things done, not just getting hamstrung with a kind of a high stress project for which they have no ability to accomplish it.
Right. So let me ask this question then from a different perspective. So from a manager's perspective, obviously there's advantages to being able to delegate tasks to an employee. And as long as all the tasks are outlined, the expectations and all that stuff, talk a little bit about what are the advantages for the manager to delegate.
Okay, the biggest single advantage, and the way I can explain this is, as the manager of a big department or part of an organization, or maybe they're a director of some location that's away from the main headquarters, and they have to run all those operations independent on a day-to-day basis. They've got to really be developing a fair amount of their time looking at strategy. How am I making sure that we're going to hit the profit number that we need to hit at the end of this year? Or how am I going to make sure that this new product gets launched as effectively as it can? They've got to be thinking about that stuff and looking at everything that's going on in the organization. They've got to have their head above the tree line. You can't be doing that if you're down in the weeds handling all the minutia that comes across your desk. So the faster you can learn to develop good delegation practices, and you've given them off to the right people, the more it frees you up to focus on the stuff that's really important. So from a business standpoint, it makes sense. Now, here's the other one that's more of a hidden benefit. As you delegate to people and they go through the experience of overseeing projects and learning new areas of the business, you're basically developing your employees, at least the good ones, the ones that you trust and you want to make better. Certainly you want to hold on to them. So that has a lot of benefits. I mean, you end up lowering your turnover rate, or at least you don't lose the people you really want to hold on to. You build tremendous amounts of loyalty with these folks. And you're also preparing them to take on higher responsibility should somebody at the top leave. I worked for a company about 10 years ago that had a hell of a problem with bringing in new talent, because primarily where they were located, that was a big problem. But they had no real good funnel approach for bringing on people at a point to where if they lost a senior management person, they could promote from within. First thing they were doing was going outside. And if you've got a whole bunch of people in a staff hierarchy and you can't find one or two people that would be ideal for that promotion, there's something wrong. Delegation is a great way to help tune people up and expose them to higher levels of responsibility and authority, so when the day comes, they can feel good about stepping into that role and taking over.
Yeah. Well, I know we're running up on time, but there's two quick items I wanted to cover, Steve, to get your take on. And one is, I guess the burning question that probably listeners and viewers are wondering now that we've gone through all of this is, what do you never delegate? Are there such things that you would never delegate, and how do you know what they are?
Yes. Decisions about what you do with the money. You never delegate that. Okay, you can have a controller in place to handle, the payroll and the checks and balancing the books and taking care of the invoices and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to making decisions about where the money is spent, that you don't delegate. As a business owner, that you always reserve the right to make those decisions, because you simply, that's something that's very, very important. Where the money's going. You don't want to send that off to somebody else. Not unless as part of a project, you've allocated somebody a certain amount of budget to get the thing done. That's a whole different story. But if you're looking at where your money is being applied throughout your organization in terms of pay raises, in terms of capital equipment purchases, leasing arrangements, you're the one that's got to make the decision on that. You can't cede that over to anybody else.
And that would likewise be true then, would it, if you're talking about some of your best clients? In other words, you'd have to decide what clients that you have that only require your contact versus contact by other employees that might be in the mix. I guess that's kind of a touchy one, isn't it? Because you got to know what the client wants. If the client only wants your attention, then that's what you got to give, personal attention.
Yes, and you always have to be really, really clear about your client's own expectations. But here's what I would say to people that are in that situation: have a backup person that you introduce to the client that takes care of some of the low-level activities. You're still in charge of working with that client. You've still got that relationship, but now you've got somebody next to you that's learning about what that client needs. It's important to do that because, let's face it, things happen. And what if one day you're just not there anymore? I mean, are you going to risk losing that client and jeopardizing the underpinnings of the business because you've left the building and there's nobody to take over? So I always say, have a backup person.
Or even when you become ill or incapacitated for a while. Yeah.
Well, that's kind of what I was referring to with leaving the building.
Okay. Right. And then, lastly, have you found any kind of a connection between who delegates most? People that are in small businesses that we try to cater to on the show that have startups versus people in large companies. I would think the larger companies are more willing, if you will, to delegate off the bat, and that the smaller companies and the small business owner really has to learn how to do that more often than not. Is that accurate, Steve?
No, there really isn't any preference in terms of who's better at it. Now, your small business owner who might have been the creator of the business, their problem is learning to let go. Because they've touched everything.
That's what I was referring to.
Right. Yeah. So they've got that issue. The issue with larger companies is you put somebody in a position of extremely high authority and responsibility for driving revenue for a large-scale company. Sometimes their problem is that they don't want to cede over delegation because they're afraid of it's not getting done right, and the numbers don't come in when they're supposed to, that the people above them are going to come back on them, and rightfully so, they should. Yeah. So for different reasons, you have people that tend to want to hold things too close to the vest. And who knows, maybe they tried it once before and it blew up in their face and they said, well, I'm not doing that again. And so that happens too, All I can say is that the minute you learn how to do it and you're disciplined enough with it that your subordinates understand the severity of what you're asking for, and they know you'll back them up and they know you'll give them the trust and the latitude to be able to do things, but you're going to be there, when they get to the finish line, then you're training people to take on responsibility and do things in your absence. And that's the best thing you could ever get, running a business where there's more than just you.
Yeah. Well, listen, this has been invaluable, I think. And to summarize, remember to choose the tasks you're willing to delegate, to pick the best person for that job, and to trust the person that you're going to delegate duties to. Give them clear assignments and instructions. Set a definite task completion date. Give them accolades for performing the job correctly, and delegate the responsibility and the authority to accomplish the task. Right. And then make sure you keep control of the important stuff, and that mainly is the financial aspect of the business. So I think this is important. I hope this has helped our listeners and viewers, Steve. And
hey, Bill, maybe we can put the link to this article, because this article was written by a gentleman named Martin Zwilling, and it popped up in Forbes. So obviously it caught their attention. But if we can somehow on the website put a link to the article so that people can get an opportunity to read it for themselves, I think that'd be helpful too.
That'd be great.
Absolutely. Well, we'll have folks will have the link down below this video for the article, as well as all our contact information. And before we go, Steve, what's the best way for someone to get a hold of you if they want to take this discussion a little further?
They can go to my website, which is growthsourcecoaching.com. My office number is prominently on every single page. My email address is also under the contact section, and I actually offer a free 1-hour consultation for people that are really serious about trying to figure out what they can do to improve their business. I'll spend the time with them on the phone and give them some perspective on what they might want to look at, and they can take that and run with themselves for a while. And if they want to work with me, we can talk about that as well.
Well, fantastic. I appreciate the input, gentlemen, for today's show. I thought it was very valuable and very practical for the everyday business owner. And I guess we'll see everybody same time next week, same place, same channels. And I hope everybody is beginning the year with a prosperous rise in their business. and I hope that everyone is looking forward to a happy, healthy new year. Guys, I look forward to seeing you next week. Take care, and we'll see you.
All right, man. Take care. See you later.
Take care, guys.